So my talk today is on peanut RX. You've had that reference, but it's also the human side to managing tomato spotted wilt virus, because that's really what peanut RX is. Peanut RX, as far as extension goes, is trying to get the message out to growers. We have to do it two ways. The first thing is we have to have the right information that if growers listen and follow, that they will have less tomato spotted wilt virus and more profitability. But the second thing is we have to have it in such a way that growers will pay attention. Because for the growers in the room, Adrian, you know you're busy, right? You are busy. And you don't have time to wade through journal articles. And you don't have time to wade through minutia. You need the facts, just like Joe Friday, right? So that's the human side. The human side is what happened with Kemerait Hodges, that he convinced himself that nobody at the University of Georgia knew anything, which was, I hope, not the case. So we're going to talk about that. You've seen these symptoms, all right? I don't need to go over them. But the problem with symptoms with Kemerait Hodges is if I went out and rated Kemerait Hodges fields in 2022, I would come up with about 17% tomato spotted wilt virus. What did Kemerait see? Kemerait's look at the same symptoms I'm a Kemerait would see 67%, right? So in the mind of the growers who's invested, sometimes perception is not reality. The problem is it becomes reality for them. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think it is. Sometimes it's worse. So here's the problems. Here's the human side. Here's the Bob extension side, the Mark extension side, the Scott Monfort extension side. Here's the problems with tomato spotted wilt virus. I don't have to convince any peanut growers in Georgia or the Southeast that spotted wilt can be a devastating disease. And I can also tell you, just like Mark said, despite our best efforts, we cannot eliminate tomato spotted wilt virus in the field. We can't. There will always be some, okay? And that's where the quote from, and I hear it all the time from growers, I did everything you, emphasis on you, told me, and I've still got spotted wilt. And that's true. That's true, but what's our answer? You can ask any extension agent in the room. But what would the spotted wilt have been like if you did not take the measures? Okay? So you got 17% Kemerait. But without the measures, you might have been 50%. You can still be profitable. The second thing is this, or the third thing is this, and this is the real problem sometimes with what's been mentioned here. Peanut RX, and listen to me on this, Peanut RX is additive. Peanut RX is not just the variety you plant. It's not just your planting date. It's not just whether you use Thimet. It's not just your tillage. It is every single one of those things. And sometimes, many times, a grower can come into a situation where spotted wilt was not a problem on his or her field. We have years where spotted wilt's not a major problem. We have fields where it's not a major problem. And the problem with that, and that's a real problem, is growers become complacent that maybe I didn't need to use Thimet, or maybe I don't need to look at other varieties, because spotted wilt is not always bad, and you can make mistakes. You cannot follow Peanut RX, and sometimes you get away with it. The problem with that is if you begin to think that that's the way it always is, because it's not. Because it's not. And in my opinion, more so than I'm going to talk about La Nina, I don't care the haters in the room like Monfort and all these guys. I don't care. It's important, okay? Despite the winners we have, or that we don't have, if we get away from understanding that managing spotted wilt requires an additive effect, not just variety, not just planting date, then you miss the whole point of management strategies. The last one's this one. And this is the hardest part. Once that furrow is closed, you can start thinking about other things. You don't have to think about tomato spotted wilt virus anymore. Why? Because there's nothing you can do. All the management strategies for tomato spotted wilt virus are basically done other than trying to get a rapidly emerging uniform crop, which you can do with agronomic principles. Everything is done when you close that furrow. And so one of the hardest parts about tomato spotted wilt virus is you can't say, well, I wish I could go back, because you can't go back. When that furrow closes, when you drive away from that field, the die is cast, and then you have to watch for it. We've seen this slide several times with Albert today. And the main thing is that we saw, in my experience, the most severe tomato spotted wilt virus in Georgia since I got here in 2000 was last year. Okay? And I can't tell you exactly why that is. But I do believe there's two factors. The first factor I mentioned is the human factor. I believe that we become complacent and we think about variety and we think about planting date, and sometimes we think, well, I'd really rather not plant in May, I'm going to plant in April, and you keep moving it back. But I think the weather also has an impact. If you'll think back to the winter that wasn't, 21, 22, a La Nina year, those temperatures were warm enough, early enough in April that a lot of people would want to be putting peanut seed in the ground. If we get back and we do that without consideration for the other factors, then we run into problems. Can we plant peanuts in April with a reduced risk to spotted wilt? We can. Mr. Alex Hardy's in the back right there. He does it every single year. Okay, we can do it, but we can't do it without taking other factors into association. Here's a La Nina, okay? A La Nina this is a three-peat La Nina, 3 consecutive winters of La Nina. And La Ninas in the southeast are characterized by warmer and drier than normal. Warmer and drier winter. Doesn't mean it won't ever get cold. It doesn't mean it's not going to rain. It just means above average temperatures and below average rainfall. And if you remember anything that Dr. Abney just said, what increases thrips populations is warmer temperatures and less rainfall. Okay? Well, Bob, this isn't a La Nina year. We had all that rainfall. We had all that cold weather around Christmas. That was good. We had some. We had some last weekend as well. But what I'm most interested in is not what happened in Christmas, not what happened last week. I'm interested in what's going to happen from today, the 19th of January, until you start planting peanuts. Because if La Nina trends continue and it's warmer and drier, that will increase the risk for thrips populations. I cannot tell you what definite impact that had on spotted wilt, but I have to believe in my heart, and there's research out there done in the past, that La Nina winters, we tend to see more spotted wilt. And we're in a three-peat this year. Impact of La Nina in the southeastern U.S., warmer and drier. Is it always going to be warm? No. Is it always going to be dry? No. But on average, it is. Okay? Winter should be warmer. The main thing is I'm interested in what's going to be the impact on tomato spotted wilt virus, and also what impact a warmer winter might have on your desire to plant, and when you can plant and when you want to plant. Because thrips populations at planting date and tomato spotted wilt virus all go in there hand in hand, as Mark showed very ably. Peanut RX. Peanut RX. The reason we're going over this now is not because you haven't heard about it. You have heard about it. But the reason for it is the whole point of the rest of this talk is the word additive. Additive. And it's just to reinforce that managing spotted wilt is not whether you use Thimet or not. Question, do you have to use Thimet to get spotted wilt control? The answer is no. You do not have to use Thimet. But if you don't use Thimet, you have to find other ways to reduce your risk. All of these factors, the main thing about additive is you want to get as low a risk as possible, however you can do it. And most growers look at variety. They look at planting date. They look at use of Thimet. But those are not the only factors. And any one factor can be affected. Your variety, you may plant a more susceptible variety, but overcome that with your choice of planting date, your choice of tillage, your choice of insecticide in furrow. It's additive, okay? Peanut RX, developed in 1996, originally as a spotted wilt index. And Steve Brown, is that you? I can't see real well. Is that you in the back, Steve? Raise your hand. Red shirt in the back. He and Albert and a couple others were the grandfathers of what we do now. So we appreciate that. Developed by University of Georgia, University of Florida, and Auburn. And in 2006, we combined it with our fungicide, or with our fungal diseases, leaf spot, white mold in there as well. So now it's not only spotted wilt, but at one time it was. And one thing to make important to you is tomato spotted wilt risk index and Peanut RX. It is a living document. What it looks like today is a lot like what it looked like, Steve, in 1996, but it's not exactly the same. We have new categories, we have new points, we have new varieties. And every year we get together with the institutions that you see here. It's not just University of Georgia, it's these institutions as well. So it continues to evolve and improve. Why? Because the threat of spotted wilt and the other diseases doesn't go away. Just a picture from one of our retreats. We get together every year to talk about this. So let's talk about a refresher. Okay, the reason for that is I'm convinced that every peanut grower in the state of Georgia knows that some varieties are more resistant than others to spotted wilt, Every grower in the state knows that Thimet helps to reduce the risk, but they may not know why, but they do now after Mark's talk. And most know that planting in April increases your risk. But I'm not sure that how many of those growers, what percent of growers actually go through and run the risk index. And the risk index is very simple. And you can do it today, you can do it yesterday. It does not matter when in the season you do it. You just want to do it before you plant your seed. Okay? And you go through and assess your risk by selecting your production practices we mentioned before. You calculate your severity and the points which have the greatest impact on spotted wilt are your variety, your planting date, your plant population, and you can see below that. So again, your variety has much more impact on spotted wilt than whether you use an in-furrow application of Thimet or not. But again, it's additive. To get to what your risk is, and fewer points is better because risk is, the higher the points, more risk. You want as few points as possible. And then you determine what your risk is. But if you are a grower who determined your risk today, this afternoon, and you found that you're high risk, what's the magic about the Peanut RX? You can take steps to see what it would take to take your high risk field down to a moderate risk or a low risk. Adjusting your planting date. Are you going to use Thimet? What variety are you planting? You know, your plant population, your seeding rate. All of those factors can be worked upon. Here's an example out of Worth County. All right? This is a worst case situation. It was Georgia 06G. They planted on April the 13th. It's conventional. It's single row. They did not use classic, but they had no Thimet. They used imidacloprid. And they had 50% spotted wilt at the end of the season. Okay? Does that surprise anybody in this room? 06G, no Thimet, April 13th, single rows, conventional tillage. Does it surprise anybody? It should not. This is what happens when you don't follow Peanut RX. It's just an example, right? Okay? This is what happens. Now here's a take-home point. I want you to look at this. This is a busy slide, but it's the most important thing. On the far left, this is across the bottom from surveys. Across the bottom is our risk points. So on the far left where you have 40, that's lower risk. 100 is higher risk, okay? From left to right, you increase your risk points based upon Peanut RX. And from the survey, the y-axis is the percent or the fraction of tomato spotted wilt virus. And it's linear. It makes sense, right? As you go from low risk to high risk, it's a linear relationship with increased spotted wilt, though we know that. But here's the important thing as far as growers' mind. Peanut RX works very, very well in the high-risk category. The data shows that if you are low risk in your point category because you've done things right, the chances of having a high outbreak of spotted wilt are very small. You get what I'm saying? On that far left, there are not outliers, way a lot of spotted wilt where you had low risk. Come to the high risk. What the spotted wilt index or Peanut RX does not do is it doesn't say that every time you're high risk, you're going to have a lot of spotted wilt, right? That's based upon the environment, that's based upon the year, that's other factors. Why is this so important? This is important because growers who say, I've gotten away, well, I didn't use Thimet, or I used a different variety, I planted in the middle of April and I didn't have a single problem in the world. Sometimes you escape. Sometimes you escape, but the odds are against you, right? This is the most important teachable moment. If you are a grower who says, I've never paid attention to Peanut RX and I've not had a problem, this graph explains it. Because there's not always a lot of spotted wilt out there. What matters is that you pay attention and realize the only way you can be sure to have the low spotted wilt is by following the index. And it's not just variety or planting date, it's a number of different factors. So how do we get this information out? Okay, half of it's the science. You have to believe me, you don't have to believe me, you can believe Albert and Mark, but you have to believe the University of Georgia and those other institutions that Peanut RX works. You follow this system. It was developed in 1996. You follow it. We can't guarantee you're going to have high spotted wilt if you don't follow it, but we believe you're going to have less spotted wilt if you do follow it. Less, not none. Okay? The second thing is how do we get the information in the hands of the growers? The first company to buy into this and help us was Syngenta. We've got these production cards. This is one from Syngenta the first year we had it out. Okay? The industry's helping us because these industry and ones like you see here help us. In fact, if you go and visit the Nichno booth today, or you visit the Syngenta booth and maybe some of the others, they'll give you cards. And on the back of that card, you can go ahead and fill out. You can see what the RX value looks like. Okay? You can use this. We have from the University of Georgia, we have production guides. I call them Huddle House guides. They look like the menus from Huddle House, but on them, they have it as well. I don't care how you get it. Just know, don't say you can't get it because we've got other avenues for you. Okay? But moving forward, what do I really like now? We're working with Joe LaForest, who's here on station. And that is, if you go to peanutrx.org, we are updating the new cards. We have a lot of information on there, including interactive tools. Barry Tillman, are you in the room right now? Okay, Barry Tillman right front. Barry helped us with the algorithm, with the graphics of how we were going to do this. But if you go to peanutrx.org, the first thing you'll find is you can find information, extension information on spotted wilt, on leaf spot, on white mold. You can come up with our descriptions of management techniques. You can see pictures of the symptoms so that you recognize it if you don't already. The second thing, I get this every time. Well, Bob, I didn't see so-and-so at the meeting. How can I get a copy of those cards? All right, we're in the process of updating them now, but you can go and we have the management plans. And we have the different companies. And just for example, here's one from Syngenta last year. But we got the cards, we've got their RX programs, we've also got the Peanut RX there. So you can go to this site and you can get these companies' cards as well. Most importantly, if you are a grower who simply wants a down and dirty, I want to know what my risk is, we have what we call this calculator tool, and it's just like these cards. You go and it'll ask you what variety you're planting, what's your planting date, what's your tillage. You go through the factors, and it will spit out what your risk is. It'll spit out what your risk is, and very quickly you'll know, am I high risk, medium risk, or moderate risk, or low risk. And then you can go in there and play with it if you want to. Okay? But there's another tool on there as well. And this is the analysis calculator. And what this allows you to do is to watch how your risk changes based upon the decisions you make. So it's asking a lot of the same questions. What variety are you going to plant? Okay? What's your planting date going to be? But it also shows you in graphics, and you can see those at the bottom. The graphics at the bottom shows you, based upon if you're planting this variety, how is that going to affect if your planting date is variable? If your tillage is variable, it allows you to see in graphic form from red meaning high risk, yellow being moderate risk, green being low risk, how by the factors you've made, you can look across and see exactly how changing variables will affect your risk. It allows you to make informed decisions beyond just entering numbers. It allows you to see the interaction. And what's the magic word on this? This shows better than anything the additive nature of management of tomato spotted wilt virus. Tomato spotted wilt virus is not just one factor. So here's some questions. My job is 45% science and 45% relationships. And I hear these questions all the time. We've already addressed this one today. All right? The question comes in, has Georgia 06G or 06G played out with regards to the wilt virus, the wilt? And the answer is clearly no. It has not. Okay? It has not. But if you look at the picture at the bottom, this is a picture from Albert. That's 06G or 06G with and without Thimet. If you think that you can plant 06G and be good enough, then you've missed the additive part. Okay? It shows that these varieties, and it always has benefited from using Thimet. Okay? An example. Do we have to use Thimet? No, we don't. There's other ways to get to low risk, but it's something to consider. Get choked up just thinking about how this is. All right? Next question I get. This one came from my buddy, General Ben Reeves, last month, Tuesday night. General Ben asked me this. He didn't spell Georgia that way, I did. All right, if you plant, I'm going to stop right here. 99% of you all in here either didn't notice or been too polite to notice it. Adrian Morrell over here, he'd send me a text later with that word circled on there that Bobby spelled Georgia. So I don't have to tell me I got it, all right? I'll change it. All right? The question is, if I plant Georgia 12Y, do I still need to use Thimet at planting? So why is that a great question from General Ben? He's the Berrien County agent. It's a great question because if you looked at Albert's slide, if you remember, 12Y was the most resistant to tomato spotted wilt virus. But if you remember, it did respond to use of Thimet. Thimet, even though as resistant it was, it still responded and had less spotted wilt if you used Thimet. Okay? So the question General Ben asked you is, do you need to use Thimet if you use 12Y? What's the answer to that? Rhetorical question, you know. The answer is maybe. If you believe that the Peanut RX is a additive process, you plant 12Y too early in conventional tillage with a skippy stand, you probably wish you'd use Thimet. But if you plant 12Y between the 1st and 10th of May with conservation tillage and a good stand, you may not need it. Okay? The answer is read Peanut RX. But 12Y is a variety that takes you a long way towards low risk. Let's go back to my friend Kemerait. Okay? My friend Kemerait. And if you look at Peanut RX, and if you looked as far as 12Y, if you looked at 06G, you go through and use this refresher like we just did, you can see what the risk is going to be. But for Kemerait, I want to point this out. I remember 2008 when I was there, and he was despondent. He'd finally come back. I did what you said, Bob, and I still had more spotted wilt. Well, there was a magic factor out there, and it's related to this. Okay? This isn't his field. It's just an example. And Mark did this very, very well. If you got 1 million thrips and you got 500,000 plants or 1 million plants, which would you like more? 1 million plants. Okay? So you can see why a skippy stand is going to be a problem. So let's go to Kemerait. And what Kemerait had to be coaxed out of him is the spotted wilt wasn't terrible across the entire field. It was terrible in a certain area of the field. You can see where the trucks are parked. Okay? And once we figured that out, this problem was, well, Kemerait, why is spotted wilt so bad in that field, in that area of the field? And then you coax him out, that's a low spot in the field. And it was wet. And the emergence wasn't uniform, and the growth wasn't vibrant. And so where he had most spotted wilt was a skippy stand, slow to emerge, not thrifty. And that's where we had it. And so actually, Peanut RX did work. It explained why he had that problem. Okay? It explained. So let's jump ahead to 2022. All right? The same guy who said there's not a single person at the University of Georgia knows a single thing about spotted wilt. Since that time, he now uses Thimet. He now considers what his stand will be like when he plants in the field. He considers what varieties he's planting. And Kemerait has gone on to saying, I'm not growing any more peanuts, and it's your fault, Bob, to now he's making more peanuts than he ever has. In fact, he's been the leader, the winner for the Peanut Achievement Club out of his district several times. Okay? It's not because of me. It's because the message got to him. The understanding is you cannot ignore all the factors, and you have to understand the factors that go in with them. Because managing spotted wilt in a year like 2023, in my opinion, is potentially going to be just as difficult as it was in 2022. Why? Because we're coming off a La Nina year. But how can we offset that? Is to recognize the additive benefits of Peanut RX, the first thing. The second thing is to recognize this information is available as near as these cards, as near as a peanut production guide or peanutrx.org. You have access. You can see how the factors are affected. Okay? And the last thing is by using all of those. I can't promise you, I won't promise you. There is no promise that you won't have spotted wilt. But the hope is, the belief is you will remain profitable as opposed to if you hadn't done it.